With that, let's get started. Great. The topic of this virtual learning event is that of innovation in public participation in national budgets. In other words, how can citizens engage more directly in budget processes to inform decision-making about how public resources are spent based on their priorities and needs? At a time of democratic challenges all across the world, but also continuing innovations in open government, which we are hearing a lot about this week because it's Open Gov Week.
Esta semana.
It's important to learn from concrete experiences. Oops, I'm hearing the Spanish on mine. Thank you. It's important to learn from concrete experiences.
Donc, il est important aussi de...
Now I'm hearing the French as well.
It's just the interpretation was ended. I think that's why you can hear us interpreters in the main room. Our apologies.
Okay. If anyone is having any trouble with the interpretation, please just let us know in the chat, but thank you to our interpretation team. So it's important to hear from and learn from concrete experiences of public participation in diverse contexts where reformers inside and outside government are exploring new practices to ensure more inclusive, responsive, and accountable governance. So that's what we're going to have the opportunity to do today over the next 1 hour, with a specific focus on the experience of enabling public participation in national budgets and a focus on the experience of Benin and South Africa. So in a moment, I will be turning over to Juan Pablo Guerrero, who is the Network Director of the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, GIFT, who will give a further welcome and introduction to today's session. Then we will hear from Suad Hassan, a Program Officer at the International Budget Partnership, who will give an overview of public participation in budgets, drawing on the 120 country Open Budget Survey. Then we will hear from Marianne Fabian, the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for GIFT, who will speak more about the public participation pilot project from whom we will be learning today. Then we will have a panel discussion with contributions from government and civil society from Benin and South Africa who participated in this pilot project, and I will introduce them later on in the session. So if I can pass it over to you, Juan Pablo.
Gracias. Thank you, Brendan. And bonjour. I want to make sure that the translation is working. If that's the case, let me again welcome you and express my gratitude for joining this learning event. We are very pleased to have representatives from all continents. Special thanks go to the representatives of the Fiscal Openness Accelerator Project, Benin, Nigeria, Liberia, Senegal, and South Africa, and also to our colleagues from Croatia, the Philippines, and Guatemala. We are very grateful also for the presence of the US Department of State representatives. Since 2019, IBP and GIFT work on the Fiscal Openness Accelerator Project with the support of the US State Department. Over the years, GIFT and IBP are seeing growing interest and a desire to better understand the role of public participation in fiscal policies. One common concern is the technical know-how of implementing participation processes at national level. From here emerged the concept of the Fiscal Openness Accelerator, the FOA project, which has supported the design and implementation of public participation pilots in the budget process in 5 selected countries through working alongside governments and civil society. This session will dive deep into early results, challenges, and lessons from establishing public participation mechanisms in the budget process of selected African countries. Anchored on collective data from FOA country experiences, the session will also aim to provide recommendations on how to initiate and implement inclusive and successful initiatives that engage citizens in fiscal processes and the roles different actors should play in the promotion and sustainability of such efforts. Specifically, the session shall aim to share and discuss lessons from piloting public participation in budget processes based on the collective experience of the FOA project, to deepen conversations on the benefits and challenges of participation in the budgeting processes and engage different stakeholders in meaningful dialogue about the topic. 3, foster conversations around charting the way forward of the roles that different actors should play in supporting and monitoring such efforts, and finally, encourage more ministries of finance, civil society, and the international community to initiate and support efforts on establishing public participation in the budget process. Thank you again, and let's start the discussion.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Over to you, Suad, to give us the big picture on public participation in budgets.
Good morning, colleague. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Juan Pablo and Brendan. I will be speaking about the Open Budget Survey, but let me start with the participation section of the Open Budget Survey, which is that the questions in the Open Budget Survey are based on the GIFT principles for public participation in fiscal policy. So we work together, and in many ways we inform each other. So as a quick reminder, what is the Open Budget Survey? We measure three aspects in open budgets. One is transparency, which is the amount of budget information that countries reveal in their budget documents in one annual budget cycle. And we're looking at national governments here, the national budget. Complementing that, we assess public participation in the national budgeting process by the institutions that are involved in budgeting, which is the executive branch, the legislature, as well as the audit institution. And then we also, the Open Budget Survey assesses oversight by independent legislature, audit institutions. So what did we find in the most recent round, the 8th round of the Open Budget Survey, where we assess public participation, formal invited public participation in the national budgeting process? And we found that the global average for 120 countries is only 14 out of 100, which implies basically that there are very few meaningful participation spaces that exist in the world. It is in fact this that was the driving factor for IBP and GIFT to think about what are the challenges. What we were hearing was a lot of interest from governments in trying to understand how this can be done. A lot of interest from civil society organizations in understanding how to improve these participatory spaces. And so that's where our idea came from, that let's try to pilot it. And with the help of State Department, as Juan Pablo mentioned, we got an opportunity to pilot this as well. And we hope that we can see some of these assessed in the Open Budget Survey as well. Historically, the global average for public participation has been quite rare. In fact, we strongly believe that in the Open Budget Survey, where we assess transparency, legislative oversight, and public participation, together these form a strong accountability ecosystem. But even if one of them is weak, that really limits the power of the accountability system. And as we are seeing, that public participation is quite rare and has been quite rare. So we're almost stalling in public participation, even though we do hear of innovative practices, we do hear of a lot of interest for public participation. Where do we see the most likelihood of public participation? And this, in fact, very much aligns with what we found in the Fiscal Openness Accelerator project, the FOA project as well, is that we find that most countries provide some spaces for participation during either formulation or approval. So very much in the planning stage of the budgeting cycle. And as you can see in this chart, while most of the countries do not provide the opportunities for participation are more in budget formulation and approval. Every round, and I'm glad that this time we can be a part of it as well. Every round we find that governments do try and innovate new practices around participation. And this is such a positive message. So in Indonesia, you have centralized portals for service delivery. So instead of having multiple channels for complaints, you actually have one common channel, which then at the back end sends the complaint to the required ministry or the agency that can deal with it. So
Sorry, Suad, you have gone on mute. Could you unmute again?
I'm so sorry. Ghana, Romania, Moldova, Argentina, we're seeing the audit institutions are just coming up with innovative ways to work with civil society organizations to either understand what the public demand is for audit topics or to disseminate the audit findings as well. And in Philippines came up with the DevLive app during COVID. So the last round of the Open Budget Survey assessed the year 2020, which was also the year that COVID happened. So we were, in fact, really worried about what would happen, what would be the impact on transparency and participation. And what we found is that on transparency, there was no impact. The global average for transparency remained the same, which is 45. But on public participation, there was quite a lot of volatility in that many countries that had spaces that were open, like town hall style meetings where there was deliberation, completely stopped for understandable reasons. But at the same time, there were many countries that were able to move these spaces online 100%. And that's something that I'm sure will be discussed in this meeting as well, is that our project launched during COVID. In fact, just a few days before the world was, the pandemic was declared in the world. In the beginning of March, we had our kickoff meeting, and we also had to adapt to COVID, and I'm sure this will come up. One thing that we are seeing, and maybe if we continue this project, it's a promising avenue, is the scope for participation opportunities through the audit institution. There is room for improving participation and making it more inclusive. These are some ideas from South Korea, Fiji, Sierra Leone, noting that Fiji and Sierra Leone were very much affected by COVID, and it was in fact inclusivity that was compromised. Unfortunately. So in South Korea, they have a citizens committee where they oversampled for the marginalized communities. And they continued to do that during COVID as well, because the entire mechanism is digital. In Fiji, there's always a town hall in the Disability National Council that did not happen during COVID. And in Sierra Leone, the governments traveled to over 20 local districts, local government districts, and that also did not happen during COVID. The top 4 performers, I'm going to quickly wrap up. In the Open Budget Survey, they score close to above 50. On public participation are South Korea, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Georgia. And the common factors in these 4 countries is that they have participation throughout the budget cycle, but what sets them apart is that their participation cycle features closing the feedback loop. This is one of the weakest link we find in the Open Budget Survey, is that there are practices and then there is no follow-up, and that can be frustrating. But in these 4 countries, there is follow-up, which is what I think sort of sets greases the wheels, where citizens feel that their voice is heard and they come back again and again to participate. A quick overview of South Korea is that they have participatory budgeting at the national level, started many years back at the local level, and it made sense for them to just take it one step up, handled by the Ministry of Economy. At the approval stage, we have Finance Committee hearing inputs from civil society on that year's budget. Implementation, really innovative practice of a budget waste reporting website where any citizen or civil servants who are working in departments can just call and suggest ideas for how you can reduce waste. So an example is someone suggested, instead of every research institution buying medical equipment, how about you start a library system for medical equipment? And that's the one that won an award as well. And similarly, you have the Board of Audit also having a website that offers citizens a chance to suggest audit topics. So I'm going to end it here. If anyone has any suggestions or questions, we can, I believe, leave it till the end. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Fuad. So many rich insights coming from the Open Budget Survey, both of the need for innovation, but also innovations that we do see across the globe. So speaking of innovations, I'm now going to turn it over to Marianne, who will speak more about the project and the pilot experience that we had that we'll hear more from today. Over to you, Marianne.
Thanks, Brendan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm very, very happy to join the conversations today and share with you the overview of the Fiscal Openness Accelerator, or FOA initiative. From 2019 to 2022, so that our timeline coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic, just like what Suwada said. But with support from the US State Department, we at the GIFT and the IBP teams piloted the implementation of the FOA project in 5 countries. That's to say Benin, Liberia, Nigeria, Senegal, and South Africa. And the main goals of the project were to improve fiscal transparency and pilot the co-creation of public participation mechanisms in the budget process of all these countries through dialogues with civil society. So how did we implement the FOA project? So here's our model. First, we kicked off with the signing of a memorandum of understanding with ministries of finance of each country, which essentially formalized and cemented the engagement. Then the establishment of a government and civil society advisory group is another key feature of the project. This multi-stakeholder advisory group is tasked to provide feedback and recommendations to the Ministry of Finance on the design and implementation of a participation mechanism in fiscal policy. We then also facilitated capacity building, peer learning, and international benchmarking exercises for country stakeholders on fiscal transparency and public participation. And lastly, the country advisory groups composed of civil society and government, they work together not only to design, but also to implement an action plan on piloting a participation mechanism. Now, while our project was, our project timeline coincided with the pandemic, which really became our biggest hurdle, we had to shift from in-person meetings to digital modes of coordination. By the end of the project, thankfully, we're very grateful for the dedication of our country counterparts in our pilot countries for pressing on and for each being able to implement a specific public participation exercise. So Benin has developed the Boostprop mobile application. As you can see on your screen, it's available on Google Play Store. It features a library of budget information. It also informs citizens on opportunities to engage in the budget process. And also, it comes with a feedback function. And then South Africa, they conducted 2 rounds of pre-budget consultations that allowed CSOs to discuss and submit recommendations on key budget priorities that they want government to prioritize and how to deal with challenges of long-term sustainability. Then in Nigeria, they implemented regional consultations and hybrid national consultation events where the Minister of Finance herself and other senior budget officials publicly discussed the draft medium-term fiscal framework and participated in a dialogue with citizens on key fiscal issues. Then in Liberia, they conducted several pre-budget consultations with civil society and the general public in 5 different counties. And this process has led to the development of what they call a shadow budget options paper, which consolidates citizens' inputs from these consultations in the formulation of the 2020 executive's budget proposal, which was then also presented to the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning for consideration. And then Senegal, they organized a meeting with civil society on their multi-year budgetary and economic programming document. And this allowed civil society to provide recommendations and comment also on this specific key fiscal document. Today, I know we have our South African and Benin colleagues in the panel later, so I'll let them share more about their experience later on. But in terms of lessons, we concluded the FOA project in September 2022. So now that we have reached our conclusion, so by the end of the project, around the last quarter of the project, we conducted several reflection sessions with country stakeholders. And here are some insights that we have gathered. In terms of what contributes to a successful participation mechanisms, what we have observed is that the leadership and the engagement of ministries of finance really plays a crucial role in driving the progress and in overcoming challenges. And most especially when the ministries of finance dedicate a team of competent staff in the initiative. Second, there is great value found in the approach that GIFT and IBP has taken in terms of promoting collaborative and international facilitated peer-to-peer learning environment, where all countries regularly meet to share work plan updates. Now, this facilitated peer exchange and peer pressure from such regular interactions with their colleagues and peers from other countries was seen to motivate and inspire our country actors to follow through with their work plans. Then, clarity on the engagement framework, from the memorandum of understanding to clear provisions in the terms of reference in the delineation of responsibilities between government and civil society working together, to having very clear action plans. These were all critical to ensure that the project moved forward in each country, particularly given that all the disruptions of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last 3 years. Then the culture of trust within and among the members of our advisory groups between civil society and government also provided a very conducive environment, and it facilitated the free sharing of ideas while also providing a structure and formality to the process and to the collaboration of government and CSOs. And then I think the next one, it's very self-explanatory. Any project would require resources. So for this participatory exercise to succeed, it requires a significant amount of time, resources, and energy investment from all of the stakeholders involved. And lastly, the potential increase in scores from international comparative measures such as the Open Budget Survey, for example, we realize fuels a race to the top culture and desire from the countries to sustain participation efforts. Now, these are gains, and in terms of challenges, the lack of effective ICT infrastructure in our FOA countries proved to be a really great challenge, especially because at the time we were shifting from our in-person plans to coordinating with each other through digital modes or digital channels. And everything happened at the height of the pandemic. So even actually during the planning and then up to the implementation of certain participation mechanisms, the reach that we could have gotten in terms of stakeholders has been limited. And then similar and aligned with the findings of the Open Budget Survey, while the mechanisms opened up spaces for citizens to have a say in the budget policies and enabled government to really better listen to their concerns and increase trust between different stakeholders, there's should be more effort that is to be made by governments in terms of closing the feedback loop or really providing updates as to how public inputs received were considered in specific budget policies and processes. And third, the budget process remains to be a highly technical topic as reflected by our stakeholders. And if we want to be more inclusive, more resources need to be dedicated to budget literacy and engagement of traditionally excluded groups, and not just only inviting them, but really proactively following up and make sure that they are part of the conversation. And lastly, as this is a pilot effort, we also saw that without an enabling policy or legal framework, and of course, with the limited resources that we have, sustainability of the public participation mechanism and the current arrangements is a critical issue. Now, I'll end here. These are challenges that we hope to address in the potential next phase of the project if we're fortunate enough to receive more support and resources to continue it. So I'll stop here for now and give the floor back to Brendan and allow our dear colleagues from the FOA countries to further give flesh and examples to these lessons learned and share their perspectives on how the experience was for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you, Suad, and thank you, Juan Pablo. I think you've really helped set the stage in terms of the broader picture of public participation and what we learned and achieved through this pilot project. So we'll now turn to our government and civil society panel to hear more about the experience of this pilot project in Benin and South Africa. We will hear from our government colleagues first, and I am pleased to introduce Rodrigue Chaou, the Director General of the Budget from the Ministry of Economy and Finance of Benin, and Prudence Sele, the Budget Reform Director from the South Africa National Treasury. So the questions that we would like our two government panelists to respond to are the following. What was the goal that you had in joining this public participation pilot process? And what was an important result, however you define it, that you would like to highlight for this group? That might be something more visible or tangible in a participation mechanism that you were able to pilot, or something less visible, the relationships and trust that Marianne mentioned as well. Secondly, public participation, even when it's defined around a specific process like the national budget, can be very broad, and there are different stakeholders with different expectations and incentives. So how did you determine the scope or focus for participation in your pilot process to get this balance right? So we'd love to hear your reflections on your goals, a notable result you'd like to highlight, and how to balance focus in participation processes. You'll have about 6 minutes each, and I would ask for Monsieur Chaou to start us off. So over to you, please.
Merci Marianne. Bonjour à tous. Je suis Rodrigue Chaou du Bénin. Je suis le directeur général du budget. Donc, merci à vous pour les deux questions. D'abord, pour vous dire que l'objectif poursuivi par la République du Bénin en la matière, c'est de mettre en place un dispositif capable de permettre désormais à notre pays de mobiliser des ressources conséquentes. Je voudrais souligner que après la notation, en tout cas, l'enquête sur l'indice du budget ouvert en 2015, l'une des faiblesses notées était que les citoyens n'étaient pas véritablement impliqués dans la prise de décision budgétaire. Et cela se ressentait du coup sur la collecte des produits de recettes. Entre les prévisions de recettes et les réalisations, il était observé effectivement un écart très important. Donc, le gouvernement avait décidé de prendre le taureau par les cornes en mettant en place un certain nombre de dispositifs d'implication, mais également d'adhésion du citoyen à la prise de décision financière. C'était le point de départ. Donc, l'objectif pour le gouvernement.
Okay, from the point of view, especially where the government could be implied, but also to put the governments to formulate these policies and also to guarantee ourselves of what we do, to guarantee as well the sustainability from all the public interventions. Now, the strategy that was followed, it was something that it was about two stages. The first stage was to renew the institutional framework of the institution and to formalize here the dialogue with the social society, because as such, we don't have a framework that allow us or that enable us from the executive power to take these issues from the state, but also with a social society and with the government framework, we can have different levels of conversation with social society, with citizens. And one of the main elements that made us make these decisions was the situation. The second question in an exceptional situation is when we had a technical coordination to work from 2016 here, mainly for these circumstances. We wanted to talk and raise with social society, with public sector, and with the groups that are organized to organize an action plan, call it a roadmap, to delimit and to line all the specific activities that we have to perform according to the different documents, and also in order to follow up the agenda. Why? Because from the work we did with social society, in this dialogue, we were able to follow up. And to come here every year and to give a follow-up, we are in charge of this transparency, this budget transparency, public participation, and likewise, we are putting all the different efforts to make our efforts better and to continue with this action plan. We have worked with experts. We also have different extremes of transparency, which are part of this pilot, in which we know that public participation is going to allow us to do this accountability. So the direction has one director, who is Madame Routevi, and it is someone you are very familiar with, and it is an institution that works with, and it is a cross-section in all the different areas because it has the faculty of communicating with all the different levels, different stakeholders, so that this has an action plan. And this is what Benin has done so far through the different processes in conversations and discussions we have had in terms of agenda, all the participations that we have had on behalf of the stakeholders, and this is where the Benin actions stop from these points, and from the dialogue we started with all the different groups. This is how we organize. We did it in a very formal way. So a second element that we implemented, which was a mechanism for the country, which we were not able to do without the help of GIF and the EDP through the different forum in which we were able to share these experiences. We were able to work with 4 countries to make this project beneficial. And of course, this was an amazing tool that Marianne showed us. Why? Because it was an application that could be downloaded from the store, the Android store. And of course, we can have this as a web and the general management from the administration and finance management. They could do that irrespective of the fact where they are from. And this is where we can align the budget and the calendar agenda so that we can have the possibility to know the different dialogue possibilities with the service of the finance minister. And that's why we were able to have this participation online from this type of video conference applications to have all the different dialogues. And of course, we were able to have sectoral ministers that make us promulgate these laws and the finance. And we can go beyond, we can go further, because we don't only have an online platform that allow us to see these topics, but it will also allow us to upload all the reports to the page that talks about the different finances, the interactive page to be in touch with the citizens. And just simply, they allow us to have this survey to know and understand better what is going on. So they can also find the truth, and they can also know what has really happened to the government with civil society, and we can improve also the trustworthiness of the data we produce from the different reports this is basically what I can share about the strategy that Benin could implement so far, so they could foster the promotion of this participation from the different citizens, from the public policies from 2017, in which we had more activity. We had the impact we had during that path from the 2017 incomes from the fiscal Benin revenue from 300,000 million and 900,000 millions in December 2022. So we almost tripled that. Imagine that. It is something that we saw, and it is something that the fact that participants get involved, of course, this generates more addition. So they could feel more obliged, or they could feel that they have to pay their taxes because they know they are used, and citizens are more involved. And when citizens know perfectly what the way we're going to use for their taxes for something, for an institution or for the government, that made the citizens to participate, to be part of this more easily within the fiscal process and within the tax process. But nowadays we can see that the expenses or the expenditures, or these are resources that move, and we use them from the different gatherings we have from social society, mainly from the time where we can address to the social sector without growing into the budget management, because we also work with social societies. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but my time is gone, and I know that I overpassed my time. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, Monsieur Xiao. I think a really important point about where participation sits within the broader social contract between citizens and the state. I think that's a point that we will come back to. But let me turn it over to our colleague from South Africa, Ms. Sele, and if you could please share from the South African experience of the public participation pilot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brendan. I'm going to rely on you to repeat the second question.
I think after you share something about kind of the experience and the process, perhaps you could just speak about balancing different perspectives, different expectations that within and outside of government. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So in terms of our goal and what we're pursuing as a public participation in South Africa, I think we just wanted to test the feasibility of public participation in the national budget process, which is something that has never happened before, not in the format that was being proposed. So in South Africa, generally, as the slide that Suad shared earlier, we are one of those countries that do extensive consultation at approval level. So with the legislature, there's a whole process which even delay the enactment of the actual budget. And so because that process is quite lengthy, I think everyone had assumed that that is enough. We're doing enough in terms of consultation. So we just wanted to explore the possibility of doing this kind of participation in a different time frame. And so that was really the aim of doing this process. And in terms of the results, the key results that outcomes that we see as key achievements, I think it would firstly be the relationship between government and civil society and the citizenry. So because we had never done something like this on the government side at national level, the most stakeholders were a bit apprehensive, and I think the process helped in changing the thinking around collaborating, and I think one key thing apart from the relationship that already existed, which I believe had benefited from this, is the people within government who were really against the process, but who have since started looking at citizenry and civil society in a different light. So for me, I think those were the key achievements from this process that we embarked on since 2019. And in terms of the competing interests and the different stakeholders, because of the process that I mentioned happened later in the process through the legislature, most stakeholders within government did not see room for this process. And they felt, as I mentioned, that what was currently in place was sufficient. And the concern was our inability to deliver as the National Treasury because of the role we play as a recommending department. So because after you make your recommendations and the budget is tabled, you are still not the stakeholders who are going to implement whatever priority or whatever has been funded. And in previous experiences, you find that even if a project or a priority is funded, having the funding is not sufficient to get the department to actually implement. So those were some of the big concerns that internally within government were raised, all valid, because money would then have to come back to the fiscus because it is not what we wanted to do. It's what you said we must do. So that's the one issue that was raised, and we find ourselves having to be in the middle of, we understand your perspective, but at the same time, we have civil society that is also saying we can help in terms of identification of priorities. And then there's another group that says, what makes you think we are not able to get to these priorities? And is the National Treasury the right department for having these kind of discussions? Why not the sector departments? And so I would say those were just some of the issues that we encountered. Then how did we deal with them? A lot of negotiation, a lot of compromise. At first, we just focused on what was within the jurisdiction and the work of the National Treasury. So the topic largely fell on the contingency reserve, the how much money we have, how can we spend it, and what would you advise the trade-offs be. So in that way, if we had to action anything, it would be within our ambit to do that. And then the second time around, we then said, instead of having a debate and presenting everything and discussing all the issues, rather write your recommendations and they'll be taken to the relevant function group leaders with the hope that the sectors that we want to action them would then consider them. And so we had to do a little bit of compromise, changing the format, and just to test what really works. And I just want to emphasize the issue that we had a lot of negotiations that had to be done, and that's how you really overcome some of these different stakeholder challenges and varying priorities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sele. And I think between you and Monsieur Shao, we heard about the importance and what's possible in these to advance public participation, but also a nuanced understanding of what it takes and some of the challenges and internal dynamics. So really rich perspectives, really appreciate you sharing those experiences with us. We do want to turn our attention now to the civil society perspective, the public side of public participation, and to colleagues from civil society in Benin and South Africa. So we have with us Blanche Sonon, the president of Social Watch Benin, and Zukiswa Kota, excuse me, the head of the monitoring and advocacy program at the Public Service Accountability Monitor, PSAM, in South Africa. So Madame Blanche, Madame Sonon, if we could ask you to start with just your in about 5 minutes, your expectations for this public participation pilot process and some reflections on what you've learned from the experience. So please, Madame Sonome.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis Blanche Sonon, présidente du conseil d'administration de Social Watch Bénin. L'expérience de Social Watch Bénin en matière de transparence budgétaire et surtout en matière de participation citoyenne est une très bonne
The
expérience.
main participation, national participation, had a great experience. It was like working as a partner in which each one of them has to take its own responsibility. For us, they didn't have any type of bad things at the beginning. We needed to create this trust. From the very beginning, we had the first challenge that we faced. Was to create this trust environment between the government and more precisely from the DGB and also the Social Watch Benin. And more, well, of course, all of those who are in charge of the financial aspects, mainly that path, little by little, allow us to foster not only their citizen participation, but also the transparency. And what we did here was that the DGP helped us immediately with the creation of a platform that allows social civil society and population could give a follow-up to the budget processes, fiscal transparency stages that require the presence of social civil society. And of course, this allows us to get to the citizens, to the public. And after launching that platform, this is when civil society follow on with the work we started based on a calendar and a budget calendar that we share with all the different civil society organizations within this transparency process, so that we can demand transparency and of course that they could satisfy their needs, they could comply with their needs, and also so that we can allow them to have different proposals, alternative proposals. After creating this platform, which is the budget, we reinforced our sessions of sensitivity, of awareness, so society could be responsible, because recently we know that it says that from Benin people, we don't have the culture of paying taxes. Why? And it was because lack of information. So we have reinforced this sensitivity to show the citizens that these taxes they pay, they are going to allow the government could also satisfy their priorities, their needs, and if necessary, they could also allow them to take advantage or escalate this public income or revenue. So the GBT also allows us to innovate from different budget fairs and to reinforce that fiscal transparency, because we wanted to get to those younger generation, to students, and even though to people who work within the public administration or private sector. Why? Because they want to create this participation and reach this. All of them are part of this liberal part. As such, the strategy allows us to take advantage of the visibility of the actions in order to promote the transparency, fiscal transparency, the participation of the audience. And the purpose here, the goal here is that after a certain time, the DGB could answer with the letter, with some comments, with this feedback from all the different efforts, and it was more or less to specify what the concerns had, which those that were important in the Minister of Finance and Economy to generate this conversation, this dialogue. What we want is the DGB, to congratulate the DGB to have this performance. And also we know, we are very aware that the path is still very long. We have to go along on that path, but we have to reinforce our citizen participation so that we could also get to the very last city, to the last village, to the last town, so that they have this transparency awareness, so that we're also involved in the elaboration of a community society budget. So really, this is a lot of pressure that we have on Benin. Last week, in fact, we went to all Benin in order to create the channels, and I am running out of time. So thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. Really rich perspectives from civil society in Benin. And we will now quickly turn to Ms. Kota to give us reflections from the South African experience and your perspectives more broadly. So please, Zukiswa, over to you.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks everyone for the opportunity. I'll try and be as concise as I possibly can be, given the time. Firstly, I think just echoing what's been said both by our government counterparts and civil society colleagues, really has been a really meaningful opportunity to explore, what public participation actually could look like in an innovative way, in new ways, and in a way that I think Madame Sonon had just spoken about in terms of entrenching or institutionalizing participation. So from us, and I speak in part both from our organization, but also from as a member of different coalitions engaged in the budget space in South Africa, working quite often, quite closely with the National Treasury. I think an important takeaway has been in part something Prudence spoke to, which is about the importance of understanding, involving budget stewards as we understand them in the form of the National Treasury, and going beyond very often what is a limited space, which is the approval space. So in our context, there is a fair amount of involvement, as Prudence mentioned, within the parliamentary space where oversight is concerned within the budget phase. But this was an important opportunity to explore what it might look like within the pre-budget phase, within the formulation space, and providing opportunities prior to decisions being made on the one hand, but also in advance. So very often civic actors would find that the process is rushed, and by the time it's usually whether it's February or October, there is much that's already been done, and so input is almost irrelevant in many respects, which can be very disillusioning. And so the FOA opportunity, or this pilot opportunity for us, was quite meaningful in a sense, leveraging from what civil society actors have been saying over the years to say, participate earlier, participate where you have a higher chance of actually informing change, informing the budget. And perhaps more importantly, engage the executive much more directly. So the decision makers that we understand them to be, in this case, in the form of the National Treasury, who very much are critical at that point. And so an exciting opportunity, I think, for us was also in finally, seeing what it might look like to leverage the opportunity before the political discussions happen around the budget. And that for us has always been something we've never been able to do meaningfully. And so this has been quite unique. And I think for many, it has been quite exciting in that, finally directly engaging decision makers and recognizing the importance, of course, of the parliamentary and oversight space in terms of budget approval. Maybe just one last aspect I'd really like to touch on in terms of reflections, and I'm really speaking quite, in a sense, on some of the reflections that our civil society colleagues have shared. One of them being that this is also an opportunity for us to quite meaningfully open up the budget space. Both in the sense that where people feel that their conversations or their inputs might be taken quite seriously and don't get lost in the noise. That for us has also been quite important in the context of the FOA project. The other aspect is the opportunity to have quite to some extent deeper, and interrogationary. I mean, that's maybe not a good word, but certainly deeper engagements and discussions around fiscal policy and around the budget. Whereas before, without directly engaging the National Treasury or the line function ministries, that was also watered down to a large extent. And I think for those who are interested in that aspect of work, the kind of deep and meaningful engagements around fiscal policy and interrogating decisions, this has also been an opportunity. And so we would really, I think, going forward as a reflection, this would be something that we would like to see deepening. We would like to see it quite meaningfully institutionalized. We have seen how it works. We've seen that more people are becoming interested in the space. And perhaps as a really important aspect as well is that we are, given our involvement as civic actors in the development of the participation mechanism, there's also the chance to increase accessibility of the platforms chosen, of the methodologies chosen, of the spaces of engagement chosen. And that's something we would like to kind of influence better and see in direct conversations in the next iterations of the pilot, which we really hope will happen. We've learned a lot, and I think the chance to institutionalize that and see the deepening of this pre-budget mechanism would be fantastic. I'll stop there, Brendan, only because I recognize the limitations of time.
Thank you so much. Really rich and important perspectives from South Africa, from Banan. Much work has been done. Important lessons have been learned. Much work left to be done to really deepen, institutionalize these mechanisms, to make sure they're inclusive, to make sure they're meaningful, accessible. Lots of work for this community to do. I hope that everyone has really enjoyed these informative inputs as much as I have. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to GIFT and IBP colleagues. Thanks for everyone who joined. We will share this recording and other materials, and look forward to continued discussions, continued explorations, and continued partnership to take public participation in national budgets and in budgets more broadly forward. So thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day or evening, and enjoy OpenGov Week for the rest of the week. Thank you all.
Merci bien, gracias. Thank you.
Merci, ciao, ciao.
Thank you
Brendan. Thank
also
you.
to the US State Department for their support. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
À bientôt.